So our Prime Minister, Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, he made quite a big announcement recently. He said every Federal Land Development Authority settlement, Felda settlement, will receive an allocation of 100,000 ringgit, and residents can decide for themselves how to use this money. Now, when I heard that, my first thought, and I bet a lot of you listening felt the same, was probably something like, oh boy, here we go again. How's this money going to be spent? And yeah, it immediately kicked up a storm on social media.
Yes, that policy definitely generated a huge reaction. The general feeling, was that this money seemed a bit sudden, and the lack of restrictions on its use. Well, it naturally made people think of past patterns we've seen.
Right. Patterns involving public funds where transparency is always the big question.
Exactly. People worry about accountability, especially when the purpose isn't clearly defined.
I totally get that concern. But what if I told you there might be an angle to this that maybe many of us haven't really considered? What do you think?
Maybe we should look beyond just the surface reaction. See, many people hear 100,000 ringgit, and naturally, they think that's a pretty significant sum of money. I mean, for most ordinary folks, 100 grand is definitely not small change. But if we actually break that number down a bit,
Yeah,
well, you might find something quite unexpected.
that's right. When you dig into the data, the picture changes. Across Malaysia, there are 317 Felda settlements, and the total population in these areas is roughly 800,000 people. So if each settlement gets that 100,000 and you average it out, well, the average settlement has about, what, 2,523 people?
Okay,
So if you divide that 100,000 ringgit allocation by the number of people, how much does each person effectively get? It comes out to about 39 ringgit and 64 cents.
39 ringgit. Wow, that sounds quite different from the initial 100,000 headline figure, doesn't it? It really does. And it gets even more interesting, perhaps even surprising, when you put that number alongside other allocations in Malaysia that people often talk about.
Okay, yeah, let's do that comparison because this context is everything here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's take a couple of well-known examples. First, the Chinese independent high schools. There are 63 of them nationwide, with about 100 to 57,500 students. Now, this year, 2025, they received a record allocation of RM20.16 million ringgit. If you break that down per student, it's about 128 ringgit per student.
Okay. So RM128 per student for the independent schools. What about, say, the Chinese new villages?
Right, the Chinese new villages. There are 613 across the country. The budget allocated 84 million ringgit initially. Then later it was reported that this was topped up by Deputy Prime Minister for over 100 million ringgit. Now, estimating the population is tricky, but let's say it's around 1.1 million residents. Using the initial 84 million figure, that's about 76 ringgit per resident.
76 ringgit.
And if you use the topped-up figure, over 100 million, it's closer to 92 ringgit per resident.
So wait a minute, let me get this straight. The Felda residents per person are getting around 39 ringgit. The independent school students, about 128 ringgit. And the new village residents, somewhere between 76 and 92 ringgit.
That's what the basic calculation suggests, yes.
That completely flips the script on the initial perception, doesn't it? The idea that this Felda allocation is some huge handout.
Well, on a per-person basis, it's actually less than these other commonly discussed funds. Is that what we're seeing?
It seems so, purely based on those numbers. And this brings us to the real core of the controversy, which actually goes beyond just the amount per person. The fact that the Prime Minister said residents could decide the use themselves, while sounding empowering, is exactly what sparked the concerns about, well, potential mismanagement and a lack of transparency.
Yeah, the lack of strings attached. Precisely. Without clear oversight or accountability mechanisms, how can we be sure this money achieves the best possible outcome? How do we know it won't be misused or, frankly, wasted? It doesn't help that finding up-to-date financial info, like the latest annual report on Felda's own website being from 2018, that kind of thing really fuels public skepticism.
Absolutely. And, the timing and the method, just giving cash with no defined purpose, inevitably makes people wonder if it's politically motivated. Like, is this a form of vote buying, especially ahead of any potential elections? That thought definitely crossed people's minds.
That suspicion is certainly out there. But, on the other hand, we also need to be careful about certain assumptions. For instance, there's a common idea that Felda settlers aren't really a disadvantaged group because they have land, but that's not entirely accurate. Unofficial data suggests the average household income for Felda settlers is around 4,200 ringgit per month. Now, compared to the median household income in some other states, that's actually quite low. So economically, many of them are facing challenges.
Okay, so they're not necessarily well off despite owning land.
Not necessarily, no. However, the real challenge, the fundamental issue that this one-off payment doesn't address at all, is the declining productivity within Felda itself.
Ah, right, the
Yeah.
actual output.
Exactly. Look at the palm oil yields. The data shows a drop from 18.62 tons per hectare in 2018 down to 15.56 tons per hectare in 2024. That's a significant decline.
And just giving out RM39 per person isn't going to fix falling yields, is it?
Not directly, no. It completely misses the mark on tackling the core problem. Imagine if that allocation, even if it's the same total amount, came with conditions like it must be used for replanting schemes or to adopt new farming technologies or for training in smart agriculture or maybe even encouraging small cooperatives for better scale.
Something that actually boosts their ability to earn more in the long run.
Precisely. Something that improves productivity and consequently their income and standard of living sustainably.
So this connects back to the Prime Minister's other moves, like pushing for Felda to delist FGV Holdings Berhad, right? And emphasizing that Felda needs to return to its original purpose of safeguarding the settlers' interests.
Yes, that move to delist FGV was seen as a major signal. The idea was, that FGV as a public company has short-term profit pressures that might conflict with Felda's long-term goals for the settlers. Taking it private was meant to give Felda more control over its core assets and direction.
Yeah.
But if the way funding is allocated stays stuck in this old mode of just, distributing cash without a clear strategy for improvement, then achieving that vision of modernizing Felda, boosting productivity, and developing large-scale agriculture becomes much, much harder.
So the method undermines the goal, potentially.
You could say that.
Yeah.
In other words, the crucial point isn't just who gets the money, but how the money is allocated and what it's intended to achieve. We need long-term planning and strategies that address the root causes that boost productivity, not just short-term cash aid. That kind of approach just papers over the cracks.
So when we see policies like this, maybe the question isn't just to complain about the surface details, but to dig deeper and ask, what are the real underlying challenges here, and what could be more effective solutions?
That's what we've tried to explore today, offering perhaps a different perspective, stepping outside the usual reactions. The Felda allocation, when you look at it per person, might not be what you initially thought. And the real problem isn't just about who gets the money, but how it's used or not used to drive long-term development. That seems to be the critical issue worth thinking about.
What do you think about this situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.